What's up, everybody? Session here. Welcome to overview, if you will, of how I feel personally playing Dead by Daylight against the killers that we have in the game. This is going to be a more in-depth kind of discussion, just kind of thinking about, where they place themselves on the meta list as a killer, but also kind of how their powers work and the builds that people can come up with, and kind of the overview of how these killers can function as a whole. So starting with the Trapper, the first one of them all, the head honcho guy of the game. So, I do strongly catch myself thinking that Trapper is going to be a killer that easily will be able to just get away from, because there's something about him that just really lets me know, like, okay, cool, it's a Trapper. All right, I'm going to just go ahead and work on these gens, and then I'll never deal with the Trapper because traps, right? But the thing is that, he's a very late game based killer. Like, his whole purpose is to let people do gens so that he can kind of snare them all up one by one towards the end cycle of the game, and that's where he really shines. But people need to also not be too weary of the power of his traps, because those bear traps are crazy. Sometimes they come out of nowhere, and if he's able to even get one hook on a person without actually, using the traps all too much, then it's just like bonus powers for him, because he really just needs to, like, set up the traps for that people can kind of fail. So I think a lot of people take him for granted a lot. I think also people put him as like the worst killer in the game, technically, on like a competitive and even like a versus survivor scale. Like, a Swift party that deals with him is definitely going to be able to, run a train on him pretty much, right? Because like his speed is kind of irrelevant, but it's either most of the fact that, like, he's, if there's gens that are being done and there's no traps around, like, if he's not going to put pressure on that gen, there's not really too much you can do about it, right? But he's got to use perks, I think, that really allow him to take as much time as possible to set up, right, while also limiting people to do gens, and then they'll be able to take advantage of that. But I still think that, like, even from my own perspective too, like, he's a killer that wins matches more frequently than people think that he does, because again, I think people just heavily overlook him as a killer. They don't really know that he's actually very much like all over the place and can really just one shot the heck out of people. Because whenever I play against him, I always see somebody else get caught in a trap, and I'm just like, oh, great. I can't honestly say that I've definitely died by this killer like a ton of times, but I've also, played against him, and then we 4-gened ourselves, did 4 gens completed like simultaneously, and there's 1 gen left, and then he's got to reposition all his traps. I feel like that's kind of like the craziness behind, like, how quickly his games can go from like 100 to 0, but even in that case too, though, it can go from 0 to 100. He's a very like Russian roulette kind of a killer, because of the fact that he might get lucky, he might not. It kind of bounces around quite a bit. Because I don't really play Trapper all too much. I know when I first bought this game, I played him like once or twice, and it was when I was very early into it as well. Like, I understand how he functions as a killer, I do, but I don't really see myself playing Trapper all too much, enough to the point, because I just know that I'll have a hard time dealing with like what his stuff is. So he's like I said, he's a very hard killer to play as, even though he's very easy in terms of like picking him up, but I don't think that the learning curve is just as easy to kind of maximize his efficiency. But again, people have figured out the tried and true strategy of using him, and I'm not going to deny that at all. So I feel like that's just like something that we got to accept and like go with the flow for. So looking at his perks as well, I feel like as he functions, Unnerving Presence is one of those perks that just like people honestly don't frequently use, because obviously the success of it is kind of whatever. The fact that it's a skill check, and when you're in the radius, it's kind of interesting. Brutal Strength is honestly, I think, one that people actually use kind of more often than you think. It works though, because like being able to break pallets and walls is actually very important, and especially because nowadays too, with the current patch and whatnot, generators are a huge deal. I don't really think that they gotta like nerf or change any of these perks, but to like a heavy degree, but it'd be cool to see kind of how else they can actually turn this perk around into something. Brutal I think is fine, and then agitation is it's really good when you can combine it with other effects that involve you carrying the survivors, but it's also not really, again, people don't really use it often enough. I mean, I do think that this perk can get like a buff in terms of like a rework kind of vibe, unnerving presence as well, but you know, I'm not really too sure what they would end up doing to like further benefit those, but it is like what it is for now. You know what, I mean, I know that people, like I said, you know, put him at a very like critically low bad killer to play up against. It's very fascinating. I think people have tried really hard to buff him and make him stronger and better, but also he's a killer that's very much like bottom tier, technically speaking, but he wins. So it's like, how do you deal with that, right? I feel like it's like a really weird combination to figure out, because his add-ons are great, honestly. Like he's got, you know, you have like the padded jaws where you trap survivors but you don't hurt them, but you get bonus points for that. You know, you have being able to put them down faster. You know, he can't get caught in his own traps, which is actually pretty awesome, like low-key. You know, doing it silent, that's actually like a really good one for like the fear factor thing, because it kind of keeps him inconspicuous. Taking more time to escape out of them, you know, getting the hemorrhage and deep wound, different like status effects when you're also doing it too. Getting a buff after you know, applying a trap is really helpful. You know, he's got a lot of really great things in his kit. You know, I feel like it's kind of fascinating to see that like people like think he's a really bad killer, and also can like easily figure him out, but also like can't escape him. And I mean that on like a wide scale too. Again, like a lot of people think that he's bad, but then they can't survive him, or you know, they think that he's late game, and then he actually ends up getting a lot of wins. You know, it's kind of really, it's really weird in my mind, but I don't really think that people are giving him enough credit for his powers, even though his powers, again, he's very designed for one purpose and it makes total sense. I'd probably put him at like mid to low tier, not like bottom though. He's not the worst killer, but he's also not the best, obviously, because also he doesn't really need like a rework. I would definitely just give him buffs that allow him to really like take advantage of his traps, is really what it is. Because you know, his add-ons allow him to add affectation to his traps. You know, you get status effects, it takes longer to disarm, or it takes longer to deal with, or like you get downed in some cases, and that kind of stuff too. You know, you can't pick up a trap once it gets placed. That's actually like a very fascinating add-on that he has. You know, resetting the trap after escaping from it is actually kind of insane. That this is a thing that you can use as an add-on. You know, but at the same time though, I feel like what would actually be very fascinating is like, because when you actually like look at the kit as a whole from his powers, you know, he has traps, right? He can hold up to like 6. There's 2 that are here. They're spawned randomly throughout the trial grounds. The thing is, I don't think that they're actually like set. You know, his add-ons will set them, but I feel like they need to increase this number. In order to buff him, I would probably change it from like 6 to 9, and let him start with 3. I feel like he should just have a lot of traps. But I think as a consequence of that too, though, you know, if he has a lot of traps around, they should the disarm time should be faster. It should be faster, but at the same time, I think there's an aura that appears like automatically. There's like something that happens when somebody snaps onto the into the trap. I feel like if the killer, because I don't know it from his perspective, I know for sure that if you actually catch a survivor with the trap, it'll literally let you see the person, like the aura of the person getting hit, which is cool. But if you actually see that the trap occurs and they step into it, you know, I think that if you don't know, like if they try to disarm it, you hear the sound of it, but you don't actually know whether it was them or that kind of thing. I don't really know, but like I think that what I'm trying to say is that if he's able to just have traps be randomized, right, because he can see them at all times, if they can be randomized, and if he can just like have them all be set without having to actually like go and manually set them, that would be a very great buff if he doesn't have that power already. But also if there are more traps, right, they should be easier to, you know, like deal with. I mean, unless you use add-ons to make it like take longer to disarm, that's perfectly fine. But I feel like was it 4.5 seconds or 3.5 seconds to disarm it? I feel like that time needs to be cut literally in half. But as a result of it though, there should be a lot more of them. So I don't know, like I said, I feel like it's because of the fact that he's a killer that's like the worst killer, quote unquote, but still wins a lot of his matches is a really weird way to kind of differentiate like what is exactly the problem with him as a whole as a killer. Because you know, him having a, you know, traps are like carry at the beginning of the trial, but then they're not actually in the game on the map, but then when he puts them down he can't pick them up. Like that's so interesting for an add-on for him to use. This one is actually very powerful. You know, the fact that he can just automatically reset them after they escape from it is pretty wild, actually. I feel like that's why it's kind of interesting to see that this kind of power exists as an add-on. And then also when resetting a bear trap, the aura of a survivor who had disarmed it is revealed for 5 seconds, which is also a very powerful add-on in itself as well. You know, my wonder, of course, is like if you combine this with like the tension spring, like if you put these two together, you know, if a trap gets disarmed by a survivor but then it automatically gets set after they escape from it, right, but these don't really work together, right? I want to know if there's a like an automatic reset after it gets disarmed kind of thing, because if that works as an add-on, that would be super good to have. But I don't really think he has anything like that. See, because he benefits a lot from people who get hit by the traps, but if the traps are easy to see, then he has to be able to get information or power or strength from traps that just get disarmed. He shouldn't know that the trap got like disarmed by somebody or like when, except for when you hear the snap. But there should be add-ons that benefit from being able to add a sense of something for when they do get disarmed. So, you know, also then, like, you know, you have the iridescent one, right? So every 30 seconds a random chosen disarmed bear trap is automatically reset and armed, right? If you can combine this with the oily coil, and if you're able to actually see the combination of like the aura, like if these two work together, then that would be really powerful. But the fact that this is like an iridescent and a purple add-on together, you're not going to see this all too often. This kind of concept should exist more frequently, I think. At least make it like a green and a purple, not like a iridescent and a purple. But again, I feel like if the trapper uses his best add-ons or best combination and best build, then like yes, he can easily, you know, catch people way off guard. But I feel like as a whole, the killer doesn't really get to like thrive too much from his own power. So I feel like the problem is that he benefits from survivors that are not really too attentive, but he has no way to deal with people that kind of force him to reset his own traps. So his add-ons fix his problems, but not using his powers or not using his add-ons with his powers makes it really hard for him to capitalize on his own power. So I feel like that's kind of like the weird trade-off between that. So I don't know. Like I said, I feel like he's something that really should like benefit from, you know, his powers a lot. But again, it's weird because again, he doesn't lose frequently. Even at like a high level, I you know, I understand it. So it's kind of complicated. And even if you look at the history too, like he's gotten a lot of changes of quality and buffs and nerfs a lot around the board, you know, with the most recent update, right? As a patch 5.3, he got, you know, his increase of trap holding and trap spawning. You know, they even changed the color of the bear traps and also, you know, added a bunch of stuff too. So he even gets like a Q when he has the most number of you know, they're doing a lot of things for him that lets him really benefit from his power. But for some reason, again, he's still a killer that people really have an easy time like dealing with in the moment, but still end up losing in the process. So I don't know, like I said, him being bottom tier to me is kind of fascinating, but I don't really agree with it. If anything, he should just get some buffs that make him have a little bit of more quality of life changes, but also let him benefit from people who deal, because you know people will just mess with his traps to like slow him down or you know mind game play with him. He can't really play mind games back. I feel like that would be helpful to have in some way, shape, and form. So let me know what you think. I don't know. I feel like people really are like a universal consensus that he's like the worst killer in the game kind of vibe. But I don't know. I don't really agree with that. But I also can see that like when I play him, if I'm playing stupid, then he gets me. But if I'm not and I just like do the gens, then like it's not really too much of a hassle. So yeah, let me know. Appreciate you guys checking this one out, and you know next time we'll be looking at the next killer on the list. So thank you. Take care.